let's take a look at the first step in the audit process in a little bit more detail, our pre-engagement activities. So this is right up front. This is the very beginning and the very start of our audit process. And we're going to keep coming back to this particular little diagram to make sure that whatever we cover, we always know where it comes from. With auditing, be very careful that you don't get lost in the detail. It's very easy to get lost in the detail underneath pre-engagement activities and in planning and all the rest of it. But we want to make sure that we don't get completely lost in there, that we don't actually understand, one, why we're doing it, and two, what exactly it represents to us. The most important thing that I can say after lecturing auditing for so many years is that most people don't really understand how whatever it is they're doing in auditing is going to or may affect their opinion. And the reality is each one of these steps, everything in here can and does obviously affect your opinion, and everything works together to make sure we can express an opinion. So if you're not aware of how this ties up to your opinion, you're in trouble, especially as you progress with your auditing studies. You've got to understand not just the steps and be able to draw this out by heart, but you've got to understand why it's important to cover these, why it's important to go into detail on this. So let's take a look. First, we need to take a look at our applicable standards. We spoke about the fact that your ISAs, your International Standards of Auditing, govern and dictate how you should be running your audit. It governs how you should be doing your audit. Therefore, we've got two auditing standards that tell us how we should run our audit in terms of our pre-engagement activities. So we're going to take a look at those. We have spoken about ISQC1. We've spoken about our Code of Professional Conduct, our understanding that ethics is quite important. Our quality control, we're going to take a look at in terms of both our ISA210 and ISQC1. So don't worry too much about the detail there. We're going to cover all the detail from the ISAs that are necessary for this particular level. Your introduction. To start off with, we've got to understand that pre-engagement activities and this type of thing is done because we enter into a professional relationship with our client. Again, very different from having someone walk into my shop, take something off the shelf and walk out. I'm not associated with them. If they're serial killers, it means nothing to me. Nobody is going to look funny at me because I sold a Coca-Cola to a serial killer. But if I was a lawyer, or I was their tax accountant, or I was their auditor, there is a much more professional relationship between them, and people assume that you kind of adopt the same standing as your client. So I don't want to know that I might be seen as less professional just because my client is less professional. The relationship also means that this is a two-way street, okay? Relationship means that there are two people involved in here. I need to make sure that I can service my client's needs, and I need to make sure that they can service my needs. I need to make sure that they can give me all the information I need in order to do my job properly. So that is the reason we pay so much attention to pre-engagement activities, that we are so careful about who we want as a client, because there is a level of professional risk, reputational risk, maybe even financial risk, where other customers or other clients that I have might leave me because they think that I am compromising my integrity. The responsibilities of each party needs to be agreed upon and understood. Your expectation gap is the biggest issue that we have in professional relationships. In fact, in most relationships, okay? Big arguments come between two people or two parties where the one person thought the other person was going to do something and that person wasn't aware that this was expected of them. So expectation gaps are a very big problem in our profession and in auditing. One of the big things that we're not necessarily aware of is the fact that most people in society, most lay people, don't really understand what the auditor's job is and is not. This means that when you actually do a job for someone, they may not really be aware of what it is that you're supposed to be doing. So if, for example, you don't prevent fraud, they're going to come back and complain because in their mind, they thought that you were responsible for preventing fraud. In which case, it makes sense to lay this down on a piece of paper and say, this is what I'm going to do, this is what you're going to do, this is what I'm responsible for, this is what you're responsible for, so that there can never be an expectation gap where our clients come back to us and they question our integrity, our competence, our professionalism, because they thought that we were supposed to be doing something and now they're unhappy with what we're doing. So as with any engagement, as with any job, whether you're entering into a construction, whether you are, as a lawyer, whatever you're doing, you generally want to sign a contract. You want to sign an agreement so that both of you know exactly what information you are required to present, exactly what your rights and responsibilities are. We also need to implement quality control procedures to provide everyone with reliable and reasonable assurance that our audit complies with professional standards and that the report is appropriate. Your quality control procedures are very much the same as you'd have in any environment. Okay, it is no different. A company, for example, that works with food. If I'm a fast food company, I would be required to put some kind of quality control procedures in place so that I know that my staff are washing their hands before they work with food, so that I know that they are cleaning the counters off, that they're being hygienic, or whatever the case is. And that is obviously in the best interests of both the profession as well as the customer, the client, the people that you are serving. The auditing profession is no different. We need to make sure, if we've said we're going to do a certain job a certain way, as a firm, we need to make sure that we have quality control processes in place that watch whether or not we're doing things according to plan. So these quality control procedures are my problem as an auditor. This is not my client's problem. This is my problem to make sure that once I have taken on the job, I fulfill the job to the expected level of quality. Let's take a look at our management requirements. These are preconditions for an audit. In auditing, one of the most common problems I have with students, and one of the most common reasons that students battle with auditing, is because they don't read what's there. They read, they learn off by heart, and indeed one of my students actually mentioned it. She says, I generally look at words rather than read them. Pay close attention. It is common sense. The moment I use the word audit, people say, no, I don't know what it is. But you know what these things are, so be aware of this, okay? Go back to common sense. Make sure you read what's actually written there. In that case, this is a very simple concept. Part of your standards specifically states that there should be preconditions for the audit, okay? The word precondition is exactly what it says, exactly what it looks like is what it is. Before we take on an audit, there should be certain conditions that are in place before we do anything. And if these conditions aren't met, we should not take on this job. Our starting point is the financial reporting framework acceptable. This is a very, very, very important one, and it's one that's underestimated by students just a little bit. But let's take a look at what we're dealing with here. In most cases in our accounting, and when we're studying accounting and auditing, we're looking at IFRS. As South Africans, we're saying IFRS is your financial reporting framework. Now, let's assume that you're working in an industry, or you're working in a country, or you're working in a place where they have a different framework. Your financial reporting framework is the set of laws, the set of standards that governs how you recognize your assets, your liabilities, your expenses, how you measure them, how you disclose them, how you deal with them, right? So there is a possibility that we could have IFRS, okay, as a framework that we have, for example, and then we could have some completely unknown framework that comes from somewhere else. If we assume that IFRS has certain rules, it means that the outcome is going to create a specific set of numbers, okay? If your foreign framework has a different set of rules, it means that it's going to come out with a different number. So, for example, in IFRS, when we are recording inventory, silly example, okay? In IFRS, when we are recording inventory, when we are saying this is how much items or how many items I still have on my floor at the end of the month, we are only allowed to measure that using the lower of cost or net realizable value, okay? So as an accountant, okay, when I ask how do I reflect and how do I show inventory on the financial statements, I have to show it either the lower of cost or net realizable value. And basically, net realizable value says how much can you sell this thing for. But that's the lower of cost or net realizable value, right? So putting silly examples to this, if my cost was 10 Rand, for example, and my net realizable value was 12 Rand, in terms of IFRS, I would be recording 12 Rand. Now, let's assume that your foreign framework allows you to record your inventory at the higher of cost or net realizable value. Okay? In that case, we have the same information, we have the same company. If they were using a foreign framework, are you happy with the fact that theirs would be 12? Sorry, ours would be 10. The lower of cost to net realizable value, and theirs would be 12. In this case, we've got exactly the same company. If they use different frameworks, their numbers would be different. Don't mind me, I'm just being a little bit of an idiot. Clearly, this is 10. Your lower of cost or net realizable value, clearly in this case, IFRS would say that this is at 10, and your foreign framework would say that this is at 12. So even though we're dealing with exactly the same company, should that company choose to use a different framework, we can see that the numbers would be different. This is going to make my life as an auditor very, very difficult. If your users, okay, are expecting information based on IFRS, we need to make sure that they have followed that. We need to make sure that the framework itself, that the framework they've chosen is appropriate, because you can see just how much of a difference it could make if it's not. So your financial reporting framework is very important. The industry your client belongs to, the country that they're in, where they belong, is their financial reporting framework acceptable? Otherwise, their financials are going to be absolutely horrific, and it's going to make my life an absolute nightmare. If they are supposed to be recording 10, but they are recording 12 because they're using the wrong framework, our lives are going to be absolutely painful. Management must acknowledge responsibility for 1, the preparation of the financial statements, internal control, and access to information. So these are very popular. This is what we refer to as our scope limitation if we don't get this information at the bottom here. And all we're saying with this is that before we start an audit, I need to make sure that management agrees that they have certain responsibilities. I don't want to pitch up there and find out that they haven't actually prepared the financial statements. It's not my job. If I've prepared the financial statements as an auditor and then I go and audit them, that creates a self-review threat for me in terms of the CPC, right? So management must accept and acknowledge that they have responsibility for the preparation of the financial statements. They must also accept and acknowledge the fact that they are supposed to be taking control of any internal controls deemed necessary for fair presentation. So any controls and internal controls necessary for the financial reporting is the responsibility of management. They mustn't expect that we come in there and tell them, oh, you need to change controls, improve controls, let's help you put controls in place. Again, that would create a self-review threat. And to provide the auditor with access to information. If I'm required to go and audit this company, if I'm required to go and take information and assess the fair presentation of their financials, I'm going to need information because, remember, I need evidence. If I don't have evidence, I can't express an opinion. If I don't get evidence, I'm stuck. I cannot express an opinion, which means that you've just made my life very difficult. So if up front you are not prepared to give me all the information I may need to do the job, then I'd rather not enter into this agreement with you. I'd rather not do the audit. In order for me to do an audit properly, I've got to get all the information I need from you because I need to collect evidence about the fair presentation of the financials. If you refuse me evidence, if you refuse me information, I cannot express an opinion, which means perhaps it's best I just stay away from this. So in terms of your ISAs, International Standard of Auditing, your 210, your preconditions for an audit, before we consider whether or not to take on an audit, our starting point is the financial reporting framework acceptable? Management must acknowledge responsibility for the preparation of the financial statements, internal controls that are necessary for the financial statements, as well as providing us with information that we will require for the audit. Once we've covered that, we can move to the next stage within our pre-engagement activities.